you're seeing this footage, I don't know what happened to me. I just found this note. It's gotta be from that squirrel. I don't know what she's gonna do to me, but
Okay, yeah. So, a while back, I crafted this cute little squirrel carpenter with an eye condition, and I was planning on making her woodshop next, but I don't know, I just had kind of a weird feeling about it, which is silly. I'm sure nothing could go wrong. Like any good carpenter making a completely structurally unsound dwelling for a squirrel, first, we're gonna need a blueprint. This squirrel, Squirrelina, lives in a treehouse built into the side of a large oak tree in Dingley Dell with her family. But we can't make all of that yet. So for now, let's focus on this building, her woodshop. A creaky staircase on the back wall leads from the rest of the house into this really cozy space full of work desks, half-finished projects, and tons of knives hanging precariously from all the rafters, along with all other manner of rusty and vaguely threatening woodworking tools that are displayed on the walls with enough wood paneling to make an aspen quake. Oh, and of course, there's her life's work in progress, a miniature diorama she's whittling of the entire village and all of its inhabitants. I know, serial killer behavior, but we're gonna have to make that too. As for colors, it's generally brown, metallic, and rusty. And as for light, it's charmingly dim. Perfect conditions for handling sharp objects. Now that we have the plan, we can build the room. First, I make a decoy version in cardboard for my cat to sit in, and then I can get into the head of a real carpenter squirrel and make it all out of wood. That I had cut at the home improvement store because I'm too afraid to use a table saw. I really have no business telling you anything about carpentry. I mean, just look at this. Don't worry, I had my supervisor there to critique me, so you don't have to. But luckily, it's all pretty simple. I make some rectangles and then screw rectangles on them. I screw a big rectangle onto some thin rectangles. This is a step you have to do so that you can do stop motion animation on these sets, which obviously I wouldn't do because these critters move on their own, but yeah, just in case. Then the little rectangled rectangles get screwed to the big rectangle, and I add a rectangle in the back and a rectangle on top. I hope all this footage of me screwing helps me get lots of views. I'm told screwing videos do really well online. Anyway,
it's a box.
Try not to make it look so heavy.
It is heavy.
To make space for her staircase to recede past the back wall, I need some insulation foam, which is really expensive. Luckily, the last tenants of our rental house left a ton of the stuff just stuck up on the ceiling of our attic.
Oh my god, and it's like the 2-inch stuff. What? This is awesome.
Hell yeah.
Ah!
They must have been making miniature wood shops for squirrels too. I glue a few pieces to the wood, then throw in some Santana while I carve out a tree trunk curve for the back wall, cut in a space for the stairs, and get absolutely zooted off of foam fumes. My lawyer, Miss Mouse, would like me to state that this was a joke and I did not get zooted in any way in the process of making this video. The stairwell needs to look like it was carved out of the side of a tree, and I found that the best way to replicate that is to just use something that was carved out of the side of a tree. So I'm using this cork sheeting that I think is mostly used to trick lizards into believing they live in the Amazon and not in a glass box in a 12-year-old's bedroom. The other side of these sheets is this weird gray-brown bumpy texture that almost looks just like bark, which is going to be perfect for imitating bark for this back wall. Now, to perfectly imitate stairs, I cut foam into gradually slimmer insulation wedges, then glue them all one on top of the next until I get that spiral staircase shape. To make them a little less foamy, they all get covered in a thin layer of wood planks and then glued into the stairwell, which means most of the footage I have working on it from here on out pretty much looked like this. To make the wood look more like wood, I painted some wood grain on it, then did a few washes of browns and yellows and oranges, which inevitably made it look less like wood. But now, with the stairs in, it's time for my favorite step: cutting out and detailing hundreds of small wooden planks. I'm someone who really struggles with meditation. Just the idea of sitting quietly with my thoughts and doing nothing makes me start to hyperventilate. But the tedium of making these planks, I am telling you, sent me into a flow state that made me transcend the mortal plane. And then gluing them down into the box, I became a god. Laser beams of superglue shot out of my eyes. Finishing this felt almost as good as when you finish a puzzle. Well, it just sends shivers down your spine. However, artfully cutting sticks to make an organic doorway into a stairwell unenlightened me. I just couldn't seem to cut a hole in the wood to match the shape of the sticks, and it was clear I was truly mortal once more. I precariously glued the sticks to the wood the best I could, and then covered up all the huge gaps with more wood planks, and then wood filler for all the gaps the planks wouldn't reach. But it did still feel satisfying to glue the wall in there and cover up the last of the foam. To be a proper treehouse, I think there needs to be a big branch running through the room, and I was on a walk when I found the perfect stick. It was maybe just a little too big. I cleaned it off with my partner's toothbrush, then cut it down to size to fit inside the diorama. This was surprisingly high stakes because there's a new hairy little man squatting in our home, and apparently, he also loves sticks. In an attempt to have a chance at ever accessing the back wall of this diorama again, I decided the stick needed to be detachable. So I carved divots into either end of the stick and put magnets to correspond with magnets in the floor and the ceiling. After a quick stability test, I promptly removed it so that I could paint all these wood planks to look like a different kind of wood plank. Something that's a bit dingy and well-used. I'm trying to take inspiration from the workshops of famous carpenters like Geppetto, Sabrina, and that chainsaw guy from Texas. To break up the monotony a bit, I add some dark wooden beams, rafters made of artfully cut sticks, and her little shelves that hold wood stain, nails, and D's nuts. You know, all the typical squirrel stuff. Oh, also there's some red splatters on the wall. I'm pretty sure that's just from some, terrible carpentry accident, so nothing to worry about. With the room done, we can start filling it with the furniture. If there's one thing any craftsperson needs, it's a generous table space. To clutter with so much junk, they can't do any work on it at all. To give Squirrelina that privilege, I first cut a plank of basswood down to size, then whittled the edge to create a live edge bark kind of a look. Then I used my new mini finger slicer to cut some sticks into even-ish table legs, then glue them on with my special finger sticking glue. Then I get some support beams around the top to make it look a little sturdier, and some nicks and gouges with an X-Acto blade to make it look a little bit more decrepit again. While I work on this tool cabinet, I wanted to address a few things. So I know at least a few of you have seen my previous video about this squirrel and maybe have some concerns about her. Trust me, I had my concerns too. But let me take this moment to answer a few questions. Yes, the local detective Moulton's pet beetle was involved in a terrible beetle squishing incident and her little beetle leg was broken. Yes, like many, I assume this was the work of a deranged squirrel acting out of her unrequited love for this mole. Yes, I made a whole video that posed some questions about Squirrelina's involvement in this crime, and yes, new evidence was discovered that did exonerate her. But we're all good now, there's no hard feelings, and per the terms of the settlement of the defamation case against me, I now must confidently state that Squirrelina was in no way involved in that heinous crime. Also, per the terms of the settlement of the defamation case against me, I have to give Squirrelina the exact measurements of all my limbs. Which I'm told is a totally normal way to settle these kinds of cases, and not in any way something a deranged squirrel with a grudge would ask for. I make another valiant effort to paint all of this wood to look like wood, and this time I was actually pretty happy with the outcome. For some finishing touches, this tool chest gets some little twig bits as drawer handles, and this long table needs a vise. So I add that by gluing little bits of beads and bobs onto a plank of wood until it looks vaguely vicey, and then gluing that to the table with some other bobs. She has one more little set of drawers that I want to make to set on her desk, but this time, I want to make it functional, is what I said for the first 10 minutes of making it, and then settled for just one drawer for hiding all of her secrets. So I cut out a hole for it and glue a little drawer together to fit inside, along with a bunch of other drawer fronts to trick the eye into thinking that I worked harder than I actually did. Then the whole thing gets painted to be a nice darker brown wood color, and gets some little stick knobblies to be the drawer pulls. To give her a stool to sit on while she works, I make one with a wooden spool, a button, foam, and a scrap of fabric that matches her hair tie. Fur tie? I sewed right through the buttonholes to create little cushion tufts, then glued the whole thing together. I showed you my stool. Please respond. Yeah, I'm starting to get worried that all this clutter on the desks, walls, and shelves won't be enough, so let's turn this branch into a cluttered bookcase. First, I hollow it out with my Dremel, then give the inside a blotchy ochre paint job to match with the rest of the furniture. I love this detail. It's so cute, and I really think it reminds you that this is a treehouse for a squirrel, in case the squirrel and the bark weren't enough. With all these fake drawers done, let's make some sharp, rusty tools to fake put in them. First, to make a bunch of chisels, I became the world's worst neighbor for a day. This went on for hours. But I'm sure they'll understand when I explain that I'm making woodworking tools for a squirrel. And to make rasps, I did the same thing, but this time with a metal stamp of an H for hard labor. This took a while, so please press H to pay respects. To give them handles, I drill holes in some dowels, carve away the harsh edges, and then shove the chisels and rasps in. I also made her an awl by cutting off the end of a bent old sewing needle and carefully shoving it into a handle. I'm not totally sure of the use of an awl in woodworking, but it would definitely be useful for poking someone very painfully. Now, for some saws, the process was pretty simple. I just cut metal sheets into saw shapes and then sandwiched the ends of them between wood to make a handle. But these hacksaws were fun because, oops, I kind of just made real saws. I glued a bit of scroll saw onto a flattened piece of wire and stuck that in some hollowed out wood and carved a handle. I think this one turned out so cute and is maybe functional. I also made one of those saws that are used by those tap dancing lumberjack twins. It's actually not a reference to anything, but doesn't it feel like it should be? To be honest, I have no idea how the squirrel makes anything with only these pre-industrial-ish tools. Like, how does anyone make anything without a miniature table saw? Or at least a regular-sized one? Or a drill? Or a Dremel? And I'm just making a wooden box full of furniture made out of sticks. People used to use only these tools and make, like, ornate Rococo furniture that had to be strong enough to be sat on by a person without breaking. Like, apparently this is what drills looked like back before we harnessed electricity. I can't even seem to muscle an electric drill through wood half the time, but people were out there raw-dogging carpentry tools. Okay, that's the wrong phrase. But we are truly standing on the shoulders of giants who made dioramas for squirrel puppets that came before us. Press H for respects to all those dead carpenters. Lastly, I need to make some planers, but I don't really understand what they are or how they work. I mean, planer? Hardly know her. With that, I can start painting these. I give all the wood a pretty dark wash so it'll contrast with the lighter wood walls and tables, then move on to all the metal bits. I paint the hammer and axe heads with silver and then give all the metal, faux and otherwise, a nice tetanus-y wash of grime and rust. They're so cute! I mean, look at this tiny saw. It's barely big enough to cut off a finger. And now that she has her tools, she can make her miniature. Starting with the squirrel girl herself. You may notice that I'm not, in fact, carving her out of wood, but Sculpey clay. And this is because, I'm not sure if you can tell, I'm not a squirrel. I don't have tiny squirrel hands and tiny squirrel knives for whittling. I know a lot of you think that she and I are similar. I've even seen a lot of you using the phrase self-insert, whatever that means. But we are so different. Like, she's a carpenter, I'm afraid of table saws. She makes wood carvings of her little animal friends. I make clay sculptures of little animals I wish were my friends. She's overly enthusiastic to the point where it makes people uncomfortable. And I'm just like, totally chill. Also, she has a tail. So, like I said, Squirrelina is now officially exonerated from stomping the beetle, which is great. I mean, nobody is happier for her than me. Why do you ask? But I'm just so glad that she's put this whole me pointing the finger at her, the most obvious suspect thing behind her, and that there's no hard feelings. So much so that Frogbert just told me that Squirrelina was recently asking him for a list of plants that are deadly to humans. Isn't that thoughtful that she wants to be so careful not to poison me? And recently, when I stopped by his fiancée Totalmeyer studio to borrow a map, because Google still hasn't come by with one of those funny cars to map out Dingley Dell, he told me that Squirrelina was asking him how long humans can survive with no food, water, or sunlight. She must have seen me editing my last video. I hardly moved for a week. It's so sweet that she cares so much about my well-being. Wait. You know, actually, when I went to the courthouse to finalize the settlement paperwork with the Honorable Judge, Miss Mouse, she grabbed my hand and told me that Squirrelina had been asking how many fingers I had and if she thought I really needed all of them. Which is a kind of weird thing to say, right? And when I stopped by the house of the local artist, she's a possum, you wouldn't know her, to draw some reference sketches of her for my next video, she told me that Squirrelina was just showing her some drawings that she had done of me sleeping. And come to think of it, the detective Moulton told me that he overheard Squirrelina saying that she had some big surprise for me. And he didn't think it was a sweet treat. And his pet beetle was clicking her pincers very ominously. I don't speak bug, but it sounded a lot like a warning to me. I'm starting to get, a little nervous about all this, so I pulled out today's edition of the local newspaper to check Patricia, the psychic bat's horoscope for me, and do you know what it said? It's never too early to write your will. I know it sounds like she's plotting to kidnap, poison, and dismember me, but she couldn't do that, not with those tiny arms. It's probably fine. Let's just keep going with her miniature. It all starts with a small slab of insulation foam that is carved into a much lumpier slab of insulation foam. And then some of those lumps can start becoming homes for critters, like a mole hole for Moulton and this cave that Patricia lives in. Then I got to start making some of the more complicated homes, like this large oak tree that Squirrelina lives in, a great vantage point for watching the unsuspecting critters of Dingley Dell. It's really fun to carve something a little bit rougher and try to retain this hand-whittled look. It's also way easier. I carved some wood into the shape of a tiny door that fits into the base of this tree, along with a small house to fit into the side of it. Oh, and look, it's the little woodshop that we're building right now. But looking at this now, I'm literally shaking trying to hold myself back from hollowing out this woodshop and adding a miniature in there. But I don't have time for 3 dioramas in one video. Totalmeyer and Frogbert live in a bit of foam carved to look like wood, carved to look like a hollowed out log, and that gets a door and a couple of windows to become a home. Then I very carefully and precisely glue dozens of tiny sticks together and still somehow manage to get a very handmade looking greenhouse for Frogbert. I sand a random bit of soft clear plastic I had lying around until it was frosted and glued it in place as the panes of glass. Maybe it actually is kind of cute in a haphazard way. Well, it was. It was too big, so I ripped it apart and harvested the parts to make a smaller greenhouse. Miss Mouse lives in the tree stump from whence Totalmeyer and Frogbert's hollow log came, and the possum lives in a few old biscuit tins strapped together, which I actually made with real wood so that I could make a hollow interior. That's all the homes, but a village isn't just houses. It's also 3 different clock towers that all run at slightly different times so that every hour the bells go off for about 10 minutes straight. And since no one can be bothered to fix the clocks, the village now just has 3 different time zones. Real time, actual time, and correct time. Oh, and there's a statue of this guy? I'm not totally sure who he is. I've heard that he was the mouse that founded Dingley Dell, but then I've also heard that no, he was actually the inventor of the device that puts the holes in cheese. And nearly every critter in town, regardless of species, claims that he was their great-great-great-grandpa. His pedestal is completely covered in plaques describing totally different people, and the critters are actually very intense about this, so I really recommend you don't bring it up. But what everyone does agree on is that if you rub his butt, you'll have good luck for the next 37 minutes, which I really need right now. Now that I have all the pieces, I can start attaching them onto the base and filling in the gaps with wood filler. So here you might be starting to think, that's it? That's all of Dingley Dell? 5 houses and a dirt hole? And no, it's not. It's just, well, this squirrel has a day job. It takes her months just to make one little critter on the side, so it's a big work in progress. I mean, it's not like she made a wood carving of me or my home in here. Not that I would want that. I wouldn't care. And now I could finally paint it. Everything got a couple of coats of Mod Podge and light tan paint to seal it, and then I used my most scraggly paintbrush to make some faux wood grain all over. which looked terrible, so I knocked it all back with a few layers of watered down paint. I dry brushed the edges with a very light tan to try to get that carved wood look, but it wasn't quite enough, so I went through and painted in a bunch of carving lines all over the diorama to sharpen up the edges, which just kind of ended up looking like a video game for the N64, so I knocked that all back with another light wash of tan, which completely erased the wood grain I had done earlier, so I carefully added it back in with the tiniest brush I had. I really debated about adding color, but ultimately realized that if I didn't, this entire diorama was just going to be various shades of brown. So I added a light wash of green for the grass and treetop, and some blue to imply the little creek running around the town, being careful to keep the wood grain showing through. And all of that was basically just set up so I could do the fun part of adding in a bunch of cute little details on top. I started with making a little fence around Moulton's mole hole out of toothpicks and string, which definitely would be electrified if they had electricity, and then painted an adorable little keep out sign. Antisocial behavior has never been so precious. Next, I carved a couple of cattails to go by the side of the creek. I mean, what are they doing with the rest of the cat? It's a little concerning, right? And then make a tiny little rowboat, which seems like the perfect getaway vehicle if you ask me. Squirrelina's workshop got a tiny winch to haul up a proportionately huge stack of wood. Suspicious. And the possum's house got a few tiny easels for her strange abstract paintings. I really hope you're not playing a Goblin Girl drinking game where you have to, take a shot every time I say the word tiny, because you'd probably be dead by now. For Patricia, I made a little wooden sign hanging from a toothpick to advertise her psychic services, and Miss Mouse has her many jobs and services, so she needs a bunch of signs all around her house so people always know where to go to get help with odd jobs like plumbing, legal work, and tonsillectomies. I make a tiny bench to go in the town center where all the festivals, swap meets, and arguments over lawn decor happen. And then to make those arguments a bit more festive, I paint some tiny paper flags, glue them to a string, then prop them up between two toothpicks for some itty-bitty bunting. I'm trying not to jump to conclusions about this squirrel, but come on. This is just disturbing. The sooner I finish, the sooner I can get out of here. Let's just make everything else. Starting with measuring tape. So I know a lot of you think that this village is somewhere in the UK, but I'm about to drop some lore that'll change everything you think you know about Dingley Dell. Their primary system of measurement is feet. It's just that no one can agree on whose feet it is, so there are 72 completely different systems of measurement with totally different conversion rates that they refuse to standardize. You know, a couple of nights ago, I could swear I woke up to see Squirrelina measuring me with one of these. I thought it was a dream, but now, I don't know. To give her place a homey touch, she has a few portraits hanging in her stairwell. The first of which is of her loving but slightly concerned parents, which is glued into a frame made of carefully chosen sticks with a string added on the back for hanging. And the second, which was so fun to do, was Squirrelina as a baby. So I guess she's always been like this? Like any good crafter, she has a ton of unfinished projects that she's been meaning to get to, but she just can't find the time because life keeps getting in the way, and she keeps on coming up with other ideas that are way more fun and exciting. And also, should she take up crochet? Such as a bunch of sketches and blueprints up on her wall of a huge house. Okay, well actually it's quite small, but as it's more than 20 mouse feet wide, it's basically a McMansion by Dingley Dell standards. I wonder who it could be for. You'd think I would know, but no one tells me anything around here. And there's a little model of it that she's halfway through whittling. It was very hard to stop myself from finishing this carving. So hard, in fact, that I didn't, and I had to go back and do it over again, but stop halfway this time. Then it got a wet slap of paint to look more like wood, and a little curl of a wood shaving that I stole from a secret project to help it look more mid-whittle. So that she can stain this little wood house when she's done, I fill tiny jars with UV resin colored with alcohol ink. These are all supposed to be natural stains that she made herself, so for a few of them I put in some ingredients that are meant to be soaking and giving off color. Some moss, a little plant, a few potentially psychoactive berries. Okay, tell me, do you think this is just a harmless jar of dark red stain, or is it blood? I'm no little critter CSI, but I'm starting to wonder if maybe all those woodworking accidents weren't accidents after all. And to apply that blood or stain or whatever it is, she needs paintbrushes, which I make by whittling some little paintbrush handles, wrapping them in metal, and then murdering these other existing paintbrushes and harvesting their bristles. I squeeze the top end of the metal to lock the bristles in place, and then just cake them with a bunch of paint, because are you even a real crafter if your brushes aren't completely saturated with dried paint and Mod Podge and totally unusable? And just because I had a few more jars, I filled them with some regular carpenter stuff, like nails, wood glue, and a fake human tooth I had lying around. Okay, I'm sure at this point you're all yelling at your screens, "Stop! Run away! Stop making miniatures!" But I'm obligated, via court order, not to jump to conclusions about these critters. So it's probably all in my head. It's fine, right? Let's just move everything in. I start with installing an ominous warm light at the top of the stairs to trick the viewer into thinking that there's anything at the top of the stairs. Then I can start filling up the walls with these sharp, rusty tools. Hanging them all on little nails allows them to be removable so that they're all still usable. Which actually was helpful because I ended up using this tiny awl to poke holes through the wood for the nails. Told you they were real tools. While I fill this place up, I need to give a huge, huge thank you to my very patient patrons over on Patreon. An extra big thank you goes to my honorary Dingly-Dellions, Brave Little Toaster, Figgy Starship, Shark in Hats, Windamore Atelier, Emma, Robert Harris, Wasatch Creations, Straight Up Sephiroth, Jacob, Miss Birdie's Menagerie, Butterpie, Becky Kropitis, Anubix, Nariana Fritch, Bonbon, Awkward Burp, Lemonade Sparkle, Big Venus, Isaac Warner, Tanya, Dragon Rose, and Aphelab. And my newest toothbrush donors, Liz Jessup, Fennel Seed, Charlotte Kolodage, Heather Way, M. Sunflower, Gabriel, Christina Norton, Kyson Morrow, T. Laskin, Dex the Littlest Pickle, Ellie-Bat1, Meredith, Ellery H. Flynn, Morgan Whaley, Lila and Eddie, Guillermo, Emma Case, Lacey Plymere, and Annalise Wheeler. I truly cannot say thank you enough. You all are the sweetest, most understanding people in the world, and without your support and encouragement, I don't think that finishing this project and video would have been possible. And just in case I go missing and this doesn't get uploaded for like 6 or 7 months, leaving a comment and sharing this video with a friend helps the video get seen by more people, especially after a long break, which really helps with funding big projects like this. All that said, I gotta point out some odd stuff on this desk. Like, there's some weird contraption she's working on, and maybe a weapon, and right next to it is a completely unrelated drawing of a chair. What's that about? And this weird little note? It's got all these names crossed out, Molten, Frogbert, and then this one that hasn't been crossed out yet. GG? Who could that be referring to? And she's got all these, like, messed up drawings on her wall. Like, are these sketches of a murder victim, or is she just really bad at drawing? And there's this newspaper clipping about... Wait, are these all drawings of me? In case anything happens to me, I want to take a moment to thank my partner Jake for making all of the music for this video, and my assistant editor Jane Chu, who really helped me work through these 65 hours of footage for this project. She has all her knives, like, precariously hanging from all the rafters. Is there a little critter OSHA rep that can weigh in on this in the comments? It can't be the best way to store these, right? We're almost done. All it needs is a little sprinkling of leftover wood shavings, and then... I forgot to put anything in this little drawer. Okay, let's open it up and... Wait. What is this? I didn't put this in here. Oh no. Tripped on a tree root. I'm so lost, and I can't read this stupid tiny map, and there's Scolina's house again. I just keep going in. Wait. What is that? Wait, is that me? For real though, how do I get home from here?